Okay, so let me just introduce myself. I'm Mary Lou Shockley, and I'm the chair of business here at the College of Business. And I'm also a former board member of the Growers Shippers Association Foundation. So it is both groups that sponsor, both the College of Business and the Growers Shippers Association Foundation, that sponsor this event. The Growers Shipper Foundation, just in case many of you don't know them, has as its mission education. And so it's just apropos that they sponsor this each year with us. This is our 8th year in having the Greater Vision on this campus, and we're just grateful that, that it continues to be well attended. In fact, 2 of the people on the panel today, both Dennis and Lori and I were comparing notes. We're at our first Greater Vision, and they're joining us again here for our 8th year, so that's good to have them here. We also want to give you a couple of ideas on what to do. The expo is now closed, as many of you know, and your programs show. However, it's going to reopen again after this program, and you can visit it. It's going to be open until 2 o'clock today. So it's a good chance for, as students, for you to get to know some of our ag companies in our area, and it's a good chance for you to network. So please do that. Take advantage of it, because we put this together mainly for our students, but most certainly for community members that would like to get to know more about agriculture as well. I would also ask, if you have not, if some of you are not from the campus and do not have a parking pass on your car, please see the front desk now. There is a group that goes around and tickets cars. So I don't want to have a problem with that occurring. So please, if you don't have a pass, we'll be glad to provide one, but you'll need to speak with the front desk. Okay, the other thing I'd also say is that we have the restrooms here beyond the foyer to the left. So if anyone has to take advantage of the facilities, it's outside and to the left. In addition, for those of you who are not familiar with our campus, our students will come and they will go, because we have purposely set this program up so that it cuts across a couple of time blocks for classes so that we can get more students in here. So you will see them coming and going, and students, if you could do so quietly, I certainly would appreciate it. So that is going to be important to do. So without further ado, let me just take a moment to talk about Shyam Kamath, who is the Dean of the College of Business. Shyam comes to us with a lot of experience, of course. He has credentials that I think are excellent and serves us well as the College of Business. So let me just tell you who he's about first, because some of you may not know our Dean. And it's very, very important that you do. So Shyam has over 35 years of experience in international education, international development, and management. He's worked with sustainable enterprises. He's a global business consultant, and of course he teaches. He's a phenomenal teacher as well. He earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Delhi and a master's degree in business administration from the Indian Institute of Management, and of course his another master's and a PhD in economics from Simon Fraser University in Canada. He has served as a consultant to over 100 firms, non-government agencies, and nonprofits in 15 countries on 4 continents, has been an economic consultant to governments of Austria, Brazil, China, India, and Thailand, to the United Nations development programs, and numbers of other foundations. So join me in welcoming Shyam Kamath, our Dean, to the podium. Thank you very much.
No. Good morning. How's everyone today? Good? Ready to strap on your seat belts and get ready for an exciting flight of technology and agriculture? Yes? Yes. Very good. Excellent. I want to welcome you to this event. It's an annual event, and it is a great pleasure for us to work with the Growers and Shippers Foundation and at the College of Business to host this event. This event has become an established event, and this year we are piggybacking on a wonderful event that took place earlier this year in the Salinas Valley. And I'm referring to the Forbes AgTech Summit. And as you know, at the Forbes AgTech Summit, the city of Salinas was featured nationally and internationally as a place where precision agriculture and the latest in agriculture would appear. What is happening today is that we are faced with a tsunami of technological change. There are three forces that are driving this change. The first force is what has been called the economics of the second half of the chessboard, which essentially is exponential growth in technologies that are getting faster and faster in terms of the way they are developing, fundamentally changing the way we do things. The second is the digitization of everything. I don't have to tell you about the digitization of your lives. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, we are perpetually on our digital devices in a digital world. And finally, there's the phenomenon of recombinant innovation. Innovation is being recombined to create tremendous possibilities for us. All this is leading to artificial intelligence now having an explosive takeoff, so that some people are predicting that we as human beings are going to be redundant in as short as 20 years, but more realistically in 50 years. While that's a daunting thought, and three of the most prominent people in the technological revolution, and I named them for you, Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, and Bill Gates, have actually come out against artificial intelligence because they've said we've got to slow it down, we've got to look at the impact more carefully, and actually have funded an institute called the Institute for the Future of Life at MIT. We will have an event later this year where we'll be looking at artificial intelligence in the College of Business. Is it the end of humanity is what it's titled, so I hope you'll come to that event. But agriculture is no different. Agriculture is facing the same tsunami of technological change. And because of the Forbes AgTech Summit, we decided this year that we would continue the conversation. And to do that, we brought 5 of the brightest minds today to talk about the technological innovation here today. And I say brightest minds because 3 of them are users, or 4 of them are users, and 1 of them is a disruptor, and that is Tom Rolander. Tom Rolander is the muckraker who came in here. He's the one who's going to put the cat among the pigeons, all right? So you're going to see something hopefully here where you can understand how our beautiful valley, we do know this, we live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, our beautiful Salinas Valley and the Monterey Peninsula, and that we have some of the world's leading agricultural firms here. And I refer to firms like Driscoll's, Mann Packing, Taylor Farms. All of these firms are leaders in their business and have a national and international impact. Well, how is technology going to affect what we do here? So given that, I want you to strap on your seatbelts right now and wait for the panel. Before I do that as Dean, I want to thank a few people for what is happening today. I want to thank most of all the Growers and Shippers Association Foundation, Margaret D'Arrigo, who is a tireless leader of the foundation, and really I call her the Joan of Arc of ag business. And I hope she's here today. There you are, Margaret. All right. Excellent. Thank you for being here. I want to thank Susan Marcellus, because Susan she's the executive director of the foundation and has been the moving force for the foundation for getting this event organized. And we were at the State of the Region Summit yesterday discussing details, and while she was there, she had it all in place, remotely, of course, using digitization. I want to thank, also want to thank Darlene Din, the tireless Darlene Din, for her part in putting this event together. On the side of CSUMB, it's the indefatigable Mary Lou Shockley and our ag business faculty, Sumadhur Shakya, who put this event on today. So I want to acknowledge those thanks there. And then I want to introduce our president, who is our visionary leader, and in the short time he has been here, has fundamentally changed the university and the region. He is one of those, he has this exceptional ability to be a thought leader while also being a doer and someone who's able to change the game, a game changer, all in a way which is very nuanced, which is very lead by example, lead by servant leadership. And what he's been able to do in the short time he's been here is to change fundamentally the university through his work with the Bright Futures Network, which is a network which is working with the K-12 community colleges and the university system to create a seamless cradle-to-career pipeline. His work on the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, which, as you know, today is an organization that is growing to change the economic fundamentals of the region. Yesterday we had their State of the Region Summit in Santa Cruz. He's also worked tirelessly to change the university. He's established 4 colleges, 4 new colleges since he came 2.5, 3 years ago. We have a new business and information technology building. How many of you have been in the building already? If you haven't, go visit the business and information technology building. It's, we hope, a platinum LEED. We still don't have the judgment building that is going to change the game in terms of how we educate. And he has been responsible for innumerable new programs so that today I can claim, and he's going to claim this too because I borrow his sentence here, we are one of the most innovative campuses in the CSU system, having won a number of innovation awards as well as created a number of new innovative programs. For example, the BS in Sustainable Hospitality Management, to name just one program. So with that introduction, I'd like President Ochoa to come here and say his introductory and welcoming remarks. Thank you, President.
Well, I usually make it a practice never to speak after Sham, because he said everything. In fact, he said too much. It's hard to live up to that introduction. Let me just add that I am thrilled to be part of this institution and part of this community. That is, I think that we're at a moment of convergence where both the university is ready to take on a role as steward of place, and the community is ready to work with us to that effect. And so a lot of things are coming together. The fact that the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership coalesced at the time that we were creating a cradle-to-career educational partnership shows that there is synchronicity at work in this region, because those two efforts are going to dovetail very neatly. As we prepare students for careers, Monterey Bay Economic Partnership is going to contribute to, in fact, creating those high-value, high-skilled jobs that those students then can take and stay in our community and live and raise families here. So really, I'm not going to add much else, just to point out that obviously the agricultural sector is one of the 2 critical industries that we have here, and indeed, as Sham has said, and as we saw in the AgTech Summit in Salinas, it is poised for explosive innovation as the information and the telecommunications revolution that is happening worldwide, it starts to have its impact on that industry. So we're very excited, and indeed we need to strap on our seatbelts and see what happens. Thank you. Have a good day.
Well, without further ado, I'm going to hand over the podium to Dennis Donahue. Dennis is, as you know, three-time mayor of Salinas. He is someone who has been at the forefront of agriculture in the region. He's president of one of the leading Rose LLC, which is one of the leading companies in the region for ag. And Dennis is also one of the minds that I call the brightest mind. When I have lunch with him, it is like being exposed to a fire hose of ideas, new ideas of what to do with our BS in Agribusiness program. We met once on that, and he had 100 ideas to share on how we could make that program better. So I just have one piece of information I want to give you. You'll see cards that are on the seat. At the Dennisville, at just about half an hour before the finish, we'll ask you for your questions. Please do start passing the questions down the line. I'll be standing. Dr. Shakya and I will take your questions as you develop them so that we can hand them to Dennis at some point for him to then choose the questions and have the panel answer them. So without further ado, Dennis Donahue, Mayor Extraordinaire and a moderator extraordinaire.
Okay, thank
there
you.
Go.
I'm still stuck on a little bit. He said we had lunch, and I just heard the phrase BS, and I was like, I'm glad you elaborated. Anyway, it really is an honor to be here, along with the Grower Shipper Foundation. I really want to thank both CSUMB and the Grower Shipper Foundation for asking me to moderate this event and coming together around this topic. The other thing I would quickly say and congratulate is thanks for, when you titled this, the use of the word vision, because that's never been more important, and the four folks to my left really have great vision, see the whole playing field, and that's going to be important for the area economically, and then for the students in the audience as you envision your future. You're hearing from the folks that will be making it happen. I'm delighted to introduce Tom Rollander, to ask him to come to the podium as our keynote speaker. We had a chance to visit very briefly before the event, and what I was excited about and what I had always envisioned as the mayor, I had a very simple concept and really a question. What happens if we essentially rub the two sticks together of the innovation capital of the planet with the fresh nerve center in the planet? What are we going to get? And I think Tom Rollander really has some real insights to what that might look like as we go down the road. You know, he told me, you know, I'm just an engineer who started to farm a little bit. And speaking as a loyal son of the Salinas Valley, that's exactly the playbook we all want to hear about. So with that, Tom, thank you. Welcome to CSUMB and Greater Vision.
Okay, it is a pleasure for me to be here in the Salinas Valley, connecting with the agribusinesses in the area and with CSUMB. I have spent the last 3.5 years commuting up to Silicon Valley to work at an indoor vertical farm. The irony of doing an 80-mile commute through the cultivated Salinas Valley to work in a warehouse did not escape me. So today, what I'm going to talk about is emergent technologies, some of the things driving changes that we're seeing take place in agriculture. I'm going to talk about first, what is the driving force? Why is this emerging technology accelerating at a rapid rate, particularly now at this point in time? We'll talk a little bit about how an engineer got into farming. I'll talk about a couple of kinds of innovation, We have incremental innovation. That's innovation that progresses along at a kind of expected rate. And then we have disruptive innovation, something that makes a major leap. And then I'll talk about what I believe to be an opportunity for the ag businesses here in the Salinas Valley. So the driving force behind emergent technologies, really it's addressing the problem of feeding the planet. We have a population that's just dramatically increasing, and that's a population that has to be fed. And one of the major resources required to feeding that planet is going to be water. So I'll be talking a little bit about water today. Probably many of you have heard of the name Malthus. He was an English cleric back in the late 1700s and early 1800s. And he was the first one to actually publish a paper and describe an observation that population was increasing exponentially. It was literally the hockey stick, growing up steeper and steeper, and that the production of food was increasing at a linear rate. And so what he foresaw, something that's been described as the Malthusian catastrophe. That's the point in time in which we no longer have enough food to feed the planet. So that's the genesis of what I believe to be this emerging technology. If we look at world population, these are UN figures. The estimates from the conservative to the more liberal estimates show something roughly 9 billion people by the year 2050. Right now, we're just over 7 billion people. I would guess that most of the CSUMB students in this audience will certainly live to see 2050, and so they'll see that 9 billion people. I looked around for some charts that could try and illustrate this particular problem, and I found this material from the United Nations. A few things captured my attention when I looked at this. The first was that 70% of the global water withdrawals are from agriculture. So agriculture is the biggest player in the field in terms of the water use. So that gets a lot of attention. Another one that I couldn't help but see on this is maybe validating the trend towards a plant-based diet. Because we look at this and you'll see that there's a very heavy usage of water to be able to produce beef or other meat products. So that's just a sideline of this particular chart. Another thing that hit me is that the prediction is by 2025, that's only 10 years from now, there will be 1.8 billion people on this planet who have water scarcity. That is not enough water to live on. That could potentially produce something that you may have heard of called the water wars, which might well make the oil wars of this past decade or two look like child's play. So one of the issues with water has to do with management in agriculture. Water scarcity is an excess of water demand over that available supply. There are several ways that is being addressed. The first one is just to reduce the water losses, the evaporation, the runoff, and so forth. Second is to make the water go further, make the water use more productive. And last, to reallocate water uses to something more beneficial. And so that would be another way to reduce the demand. So let me get to the question of how Tom got into farming. Well, I've had a career that I spent as an engineer seeking paradigm shifts. I've been excited by major changes that I see evolving. A lot of times what characterizes those changes are that the business community doesn't believe it's really a rational, good business, and the technology community might not necessarily believe that it's a doable technology. When those two things come together, that's something that I'm very interested in. Early days of the personal computer were that way. They were regarded as toys. Those of you that remember Byte magazine, back in 1975, the cover of that magazine was titled Computers, the World's Greatest Toy. So it was kind of a joke at that point in time. It was not something anybody took seriously. I'd best guess that everybody now no longer considers any of that with any humor. Next was getting into optical and electronic publishing. That was another major paradigm shift that led to now the information, the digital age that we're storing on the cloud. And of course, the internet is an enabler for that. So in the spring of 2012, I'd sold my last startup company, was getting ready to start another one. And a couple of things happened. One was I was introduced to a book by Peter Diamandis. He was the founder of the X Prize Foundation, the organization that sponsored that space race, the Spaceship One, and a really forward thinker. I'll show a video that he authored a little later in my presentation. So this was fascinating. His book was Abundance, the Future is Brighter Than You Think. So it was really addressing engineers, that we're going to save the world. And I thought that was pretty cool. Well, another thing happened at that time, and that was that I had a call from a neighbor, a friend of mine in Pacific Grove, Dr. Ko Nishimura. He called me and said he wanted to talk to me about an opportunity working for his company. Well, that company was Ecopia Farms up in Silicon Valley. And that was an opportunity that really did change my life and move me into this new paradigm shift. So I've got a video here that I'm going to show.
Tucked into this unassuming warehouse in Campbell is the Silicon Valley version of farming.
Well, welcome to the farm. A little bit of Star Trek, a little bit of Willy Wonka.
Philip Folk is the Captain Kirk of this factory.
We produce wonderful things.
An inventor by nature, an engineer by nurture.
I worked for a company that built cell phones and PlayStations and networking equipment by the jillions.
What is a guy who comes from a tech background doing in farming?
I could not grow a houseplant to save my life, but this, I view it as an optimization problem, a production problem. So that I'm very good at.
Folk set out to solve one of the world's most pressing problems.
Water conservation is such a critical issue.
And under these red and blue lights, he thinks he may have the answer.
Plants don't need full sunlight to grow. Photosynthesis occurs only in a small band of red and a small band of blue. So that's all we give it. This is kind of like a plant spa. Things grow very, very fast in ideal conditions.
More than 370 lettuces, herbs, and microgreens start their lives here at Ecopia Farms.
Chervil and garlic chives, radishes and peppers. We're playing around with tomatoes. This is the nursery. There's 340 some plants in each one of these.
Growing and harvesting happens year-round without worries about Mother Nature's whims or man-made waste. There's no excess water runoff and no pesticides. He hopes that in time, what took root in this Bay Area warehouse will sprout into a solution for a worldwide dilemma, growing an abundance of healthy, fresh food where land, water, and soil are scarce.
That's the magic of Silicon Valley.
In Campbell, Vicki Nguyen, NBC Bay Area News.
So I had my first meeting with Ko, and then he brought me up to Campbell to tour the farm. I literally walked in the door and I was hooked. This looked like a great place for an engineer to come and have a wonderful time. So I got a chance to get my hands dirty. Well, those of my friends that know me as a person that doesn't do yard work. In fact, on my second date with my wife now of 34 years, on my second date, I looked at her across the dinner table, made eye contact, and I said to her, I don't do yard work. So 34 years later, I have been consistent in that. So you can imagine the surprise, first of all, from my wife, and then from all my friends when I announced that I was going to get into farming. Well, this was incredibly novel for me. I had a chance to go in and, as an engineer, actually get my hands dirty, to have dirt underneath my fingernails. As you can see from these pictures, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. Well, I was responsible for the front end and back end IT, for all of the IT at the farm. And to do that, I felt like I actually needed to come in on the ground level and do literally everything, from sales entry all the way through planting, harvesting, watering, and so forth. So I got a chance to have a very novel experience in my career. Well, there's one story I have to take a digress to, and that is the application of the scientific method. Well, I was, as an engineer, totally excited about the fact that we were now controlling the entire environment. We were controlling the amount of sunlight, the amount of water, we were controlling pests. We were really applying a scientific process to agriculture. And so I had lunch one day and was sitting next to Dr. Dave King. He's a UC Davis ag professor who was a consultant, soil scientist who was helping with the farm. And I was going on about how we were going to just perfect the science of farming. When I finished my conversation, took a breath, he said, "Tom, do you have any children?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, how many?" I said, 4 children. Dave says to me, "Well, did you raise them all the same? Feed them all the same? Clothe them all the same? Love them all the same?" I said, "Of course." He said, "Well, how'd they turn out?" Well, that's a little simplistic story, but it does indicate that with biology, there's genetics involved, and you can't quite expect the same results from the same experiment every time. So let's look at some of the emergent technologies. The 2 areas that I'm going to talk about this morning are incremental, and those are things that we expect, small improvements. Generally what happens is things become cheaper, faster, smaller. So those things we expect as incremental. Disruptive really does change an existing marketplace and oftentimes removes a previous technology. How many of you still have VHS players? Probably not. Well, maybe a couple. Okay, all right. All right, I'm proven wrong on that one. Well, they'll be around for a while yet. But anyway, certainly DVDs and now streaming online are replacing a lot of those technologies. Another area of disruption is exponential innovation, and I will get to that in the video a little bit later on. So in incremental innovation, there are 3 topics I want to hit in this, are the Internet of Things. You've probably heard that term. It gets a lot of buzz these days, and big data. And these subjects are something I struggled with. Were they incremental or were they disruptive? And they're actually aspects of both. Next is precision agriculture, and then cyber-physical systems. And I'll go into a little detail on each one of those. The Internet of Things is really about connecting literally everything you can think of. From your devices that you carry around, your mobile devices, anything you think of as computing, literally the light switches in your home, the garage door openers, the traffic lights, literally everything is in our life has the ability, or we have sensors, and then we also have actuators that come out and control things. And these are all going to be addressable in the Internet of Things. Not a very fancy name, but it certainly does describe this explosion of the Internet. Well, when you have all these sensors that are out there gathering this data, you now have huge amounts of data. Well, that great amount of data presents challenges in terms of its analysis. And so that's opening up whole new fields of that work with the big data. I'm going to get a little bit geeky on you for a second. This may be a term that you can use among your friends. Impress them that you know the difference between IPv4 and IPv6. If you have 5 is missing. Okay, IPv4 is the original internet that was deployed in 1981. This had a 32-bit address space. What that meant was the original internet could address 4 billion unique devices. So we could have 4 billion computers, 4 billion different devices that were connected. Well, it was pretty clear early on that was not enough of an address space, that we needed to get bigger than that. So what do you suppose happened? I think they may have overshot a little bit. They went from 32 bits to 128 bits. This is a number that's enormous. That's 16 billion billion. That's a 3 followed by 38 digits. That's possibly a big enough number for astronomers, and I've heard politicians, so I'm not sure. But anyway, it is a huge number. Okay, next, during my research for this talk, putting materials together, I was delighted to encounter a copy of the Californian last week, which had an article there about a team here at CSUMB led by Forrest Melton, where they're taking NASA satellite data and using it to measure drought, creating metrics to measure drought, measure the acreage that are going fallow each year. So that was just one use of that big data. So precision agriculture is all about making farming more efficient, producing more food, minimizing environmental impact out there, which is a good thing for the future of farming because you have to have an environment to do the farming, and then reducing the cost, making it cheaper for the consumer. Cheaper to produce, hopefully cheaper for the consumer. I have a video here that's going to illustrate a very new modern farm using precision agriculture and big data.
There's still a man in the driver's seat, but this combine steers itself by GPS. And there are still men in the fields, but this modern farm runs on big data. Everything on this nearly 20,000-acre Indiana farm is tracked, from the moisture of the soil to the precise productivity of every few square yards of corn.
Right there's the irrigation stop on the old Google map, and then here in a minute, we're about ready to enter it, we'll see our yield drop off. You see it starting to drop down from 250.
With data streaming from soil sensors, combines, and satellites, Tom Farms manages an immense amount of information through its cloud computing system. It's all geared towards increasing yield.
So that future is already here. As you might imagine, it's a fairly expensive initial investment at this point in time, but we can only expect in the future that the costs will come down as the more and more of this technology is used and produced, and so that future will happen. It is happening. Next, I want to go into cyber-physical systems. This is really where we connect together the Internet of Things and big data. So we start in the lower left with an object domain. These are objects that are sensing. So they're sensing temperature, humidity, light, and so forth. This data is being gathered and put up into the cloud, into cyberspace. It then can be analyzed because what's going to happen is that data is going to be used for actuation, for going down and controlling perhaps the amount of water or the amount of amendments or nutrients that are put in certain areas of soil of a farm. So this is the whole combination. It is a closed system from sensors, taking the data, analyzing it, and going back to actuation. The next video I'm going to show you is where is this emerging technology taking us? The Peter Diamandis that I mentioned earlier, he has a PhD from MIT and a doctor's degree from Harvard. So a pretty smart guy, and he's a real futurist. And he believes that the future direction of technology is leading us towards synthetic biology. And this is a brief video that will lead into his view.
This global network, or Internet of Things, will connect everyone and everything. And at the end of these connections will be an explosion of 1 trillion sensors, taking in images, listening to sounds, and measuring everything from vibrations to acceleration to temperature. The information gathered by these sensors will then be carried by the Internet of Things to AIs, which will then mine this explosion of data, allowing you to effectively know anything you want, anytime, anywhere. Perhaps this shouldn't come as much of a surprise, but the rate of technological progress is actually accelerating. After all, unlike the 2-million-year-old spearhead, the earliest mechanical computers, invented a mere century ago, have been doubling in price performance every 18 to 24 months. Progressing from mechanical computers to relays, vacuum tubes, transistors, to today's integrated circuits at epic speeds. Computers are now 1 million times faster, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times cheaper than they were just 25 years ago. At this rate, over the next 25 years, computers will soon become microscopic in size, infinite in supply, and effectively free. This infinite computing power, along with artificial intelligence, will converge to transform the last, and certainly not least, disruptive exponential technology we'll be talking about, the field of synthetic biology. Every living organism contains the instruction code of DNA, written in 4 letters, A, T, C, and G, that directs everything, what proteins and carbohydrates the cell produce, and where the cell is muscle, nerve, or skin. Today, with the advent of synthetic biology, DNA has become our new programming language. Using infinite computing and AI, we can design a sequence of DNA that will direct a cell to manufacture the perfect protein or carbohydrate to be used for foods, fuel, or vaccines. Far more tailored and efficient than ever before.
Pretty incredible view of the future of exponential technology. He talks even faster than I do. Let's look a little bit at disruptive innovation. And I believe that one of the focus that is taking place in disruptive innovation is moving farm production to the consumer. That's what the vertical farming and these other trends are. What we've had happen over the past hundreds of years is we have moved people from proximity to where food is grown into the urban areas. It's because jobs are in the urban areas. So we've got a wider spread distance between those two. The disruptive innovation that I see and I've been part of taking place is in moving that farming into a location near the consumer. So there are several kinds of vertical farming. And the first kinds are without soil. These are water with nutrients in the water. Hydroponics, aeroponics, and aquaponics. I'll show just briefly a slide on each of those. And then we have farming vertically with soil, which is what I showed in that video on Acopia Farms. So that was still in soil, and it was stacked shelves that Acopia Farms was doing. So vertical farming, hydroponics. This is the process of growing plants. Nutrients are provided through water and without soil. This particular photograph is of a building right now that's in Milan. This is the U.S. pavilion at the Milan Expo. And the architect, when he put that pavilion together for this World's Fair, decided that what he wanted to do as an innovative approach to that architecture was to have an exterior wall that was in fact a vertical farm. And this is a hydroponic farm. Another form of hydroponics essentially is aeroponics. And that is using a mist to mist the root system of the plants. And so it doesn't use an aggregate or any other medium. You'll see here that the roots of this plant system are basically in air. They're just going to be misted. They're not in either soil or in water. The third form of this water-based vertical farming is aquaponics. This is the one I have the most difficulty understanding. This has got to be a very complex problem. I don't know how many of you have tried to keep a goldfish alive, but we're talking about having a fish in a tank, which are then producing waste. That waste is then delivered as nutrients to the plants. The plants filter that water, and it goes back to the fish again. Very complex system, but there's actually quite a bit of aquaponics going on these days. So I want to move into the focus of what I believe is my conclusion here. My insight from my experience as a IT person, as somebody involved with farming in Silicon Valley, is that agronomy is about biology. It is incredibly complex. Second, engineers are really good at trial and error. Engineers will eventually figure out agronomy. It's probably going to take an awful lot of trial and error for them to do that. But I feel a little bit like Paul Revere. The engineers are coming. There are going to be more engineers involved in the agribusinesses. And lastly, I think the agribusinesses of Salinas Valley have really a couple of unique opportunities. One is that this industry understands agronomy. So if agronomy is going to take place in urban locations, why shouldn't that technology be moved from Salinas Valley into those urban areas where that crop will be grown? And of course, the proximity of Silicon Valley to the Salinas Valley, I think, is pretty clear. To be able to combine those two together would be an ideal opportunity. So, to summarize what I've gone over today, really it's the explosion of our population that's driving the emerging technology that we're seeing. How did Tom become a farmer? Well, I think the engineers are coming. And as far as emergent technologies, the incremental innovation is going to give us efficiencies, more efficiencies in agriculture. The disruptive innovation will largely, I think, move food production closer to the consumer. And lastly, there is a great deal of knowledge of agronomy here in this valley, and I believe that can be leveraged to new business opportunities. So, as I was figuring out how to wrap up my talk today, I, of course, went out and Googled. So I Googled the subject of jokes, humor stories, and puns, and agriculture and farming. And I discovered this one, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It's by Leo Kearse. He actually won the 2015 UK Pun Championship with this pun. People who think vertical farms are the solution to world hunger need to grow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Well done, and a very clever way to end the talk. I like that, a pun. You'll start seeing all of us in the Valley start incorporating that as we make the circuit. So now I have the really the distinct pleasure to introduce three terrific friends, colleagues, and North American and global leaders in the ag industry. And so I'm going to keep it simple and go from my left to right. You have the official biographies of each of them in your program, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But and so before I introduce Dr. Bob Whitaker, I'll just underscore the part about writing your questions. What we're going to do from this point is we're going to let each of the three talk a little bit about what they see in terms of how technology is going to impact agribusiness, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves, and we're going to invite Tom into that conversation as well. But one of the things those of us who have been here for years know, there tend to be a lot of questions, and I know speaking to each of the panelists, they sure want to make sure you have an opportunity to get those questions answered. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Bob Whitaker. Bob is the Vice President of Technology for the Produce Marketing Association, which is really, the ag industry has been well served by their trade associations over the years, and we have a number of terrific ones. But the Produce Marketing Association is really the show, so to speak, in terms of where the whole industry gathers and comes together. And Bob Whitaker really is one of the critical point people in the intersection between industry, government, and our trade groups, and he has been so for decades around our technical issues, our traceability issues, our food safety issues, and those of you who follow our industry know that dominates a lot of what goes on in our industry these days. And what's important about Bob is not only the fact that he does that, serves that role, understands and can represent the technical side of the business, which is absolutely critical. Folks like me just run around and remain just absolutely distraught that radicchio has knocked kale off the top of the charts. And golly gee whiz, red beets should not be ahead of radicchio in terms of the color red. The reality is our industry has to have people like Bob so we can move forward to be economically viable. One of the things I've enjoyed, and I've spent a lot of time with Bob over the last several years, is he is a man on a mission. And that mission has been to fully understand how technology will impact our industry. And he has got, and what's important about PMA is they have taken a global position. So Bob does see a global picture that I think is worth noting and worth sharing. And I distinctly use the word mission because it is not a job, it's an obsession. And it's a labor of love on behalf of the entire industry. As a former mayor, I love the fact he was he lived in Salinas for many years, and what's important about that, to underscore his comments as I hand off the microphone to Bob, is he worked in the industry for a number of years. So he has a very practical working knowledge of the needs of the industry. So that allows him to really give a very unique and specific and informed view of the comments he's about to make. Bob?
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that and very kind remarks. I think the biggest accomplishment I've just gotten, though, is that I just got the microphone away from Dennis. Which is not an easy thing to do.
I hit my mark.
You did. You really did. You really did. Well, I'd like to add my thanks, too, to the organizers here at CSUMB and also to the Grower Shipper Foundation for inviting me to come to this exciting event today. You know, the position was put to me as, you know, how do I think technology is going to impact the industry? And I think I'd start off by saying, I think as Tom pointed out, and we've already heard this morning from the Dean and others, the technology is here already. It's now. This valley has been impacted by it, has been a leader in technology over the years. If you think just short 30 years ago, the products we produce today were probably not in anybody's imagination then. But if you look at the things that have taken place and how products and crops are cultivated, the processing plants that have arisen, the value-added products that come out that meet the consumer's need for potable products that are easy and convenient to use, they weren't there 30 years ago. And today they are. They're part of our lives. It's part of what we do, and we're growing from there. If you look at just in our fields, the types of technology that already exists with soil sensors and bed leveling and planting density monitors and automatic machines that help us weed our crops and thin our crops. All of these things were you know, the subject of conferences 5 and 10 years ago that today are a reality. So I think this is really a continuing, albeit a faster and more accelerated continuing of technology and how it will affect our industry as we go forward. I also notice, having not lived here now for 2 years, but frequently coming back to visit every few months, that technology has really become almost the social setting here in Salinas. I see more advertisements for wine and cheese parties and gatherings and group meetings around the subject matter of technology. So the awareness on what technology is and what it can do for the industry is certainly growing. I happened to be up in Silicon Valley yesterday meeting with some folks, and everybody in the room, there's about 10 or 15 people that I was talking to in kind of a group setting, and every one of them was on their way that night to some social event around the technologies that they were talking about, meeting with investors, meeting people from the industry to try to understand the fruit and vegetable industry more deeply. And that's really impressive, that energy, that momentum, that awareness, certainly the activities that have happened here in the Valley through a lot of the efforts of people like Dennis have had an impact on our industry already and will continue to have it in the future as those meetings and that awareness and that integration of information from people who think in terms of invention and innovation to those who are producing our food kind of merge together. I think we'll see really exciting things to come. If you look out, I'm sure others will hit some topics, and I'll try to maybe focus just on a few here as I finish up my time. But I think it's quite apparent that the Internet of Everything, or the Internet of Things, as Tom was talking about, can have tremendous impact on our industry. If you think about all of the things that we have in our supply web, and they can all then gather information and be able to send that information to the cloud so that it can be analyzed, and we can determine the exact efficiencies of how we move products from the field to the marketplace. We're bound to find efficiencies and cost savings and things of that nature. And let's face it, the produce industry is built on saving costs. We very rarely get the privilege of being able to raise our prices, and so we're always looking to find cost savings, to improve efficiencies. And certainly being able to harvest that data and having the understanding to know which data we want to harvest and evaluate is going to help us manage our resources and manage the efficiency of our supply chain much more effectively than what we can even manage today. I think the other thing that we're going to see, and Tom talked a little bit about recombinant innovations. I think of them as convergent technologies, but certainly the ability of computational capacity has impacted a number of different disciplines. I mean, when you think about computational capacity, and you think about the fact that there's 3.5 zettabytes, it's 10 to the 21st data going to be generated this year. By 2100, there'll be more devices that are able to collect equipment than 100 times the number of grains of sand on all the beaches of the world. It's an incredible level. It's 10 to the 28th for those of you that are calculating. A $1,000 computer will have all the computational capacity of every human that's on Earth today. You just think about those numbers, it's incredible. So that if you take that computational capacity and you start marrying it up with other disciplines, for example, genetics. You know, we could take apart DNA and do digestions of DNA going back 25 or 30 years ago. When I was in graduate school, that machine took a room about this size, but it could be done. And over the course of a year, you could sequence small bits of data. We've had that capability. But when you take the computational capacity we have today, where we can take those sequences and look for best fits and create entire genetic maps, our knowledge of how genes are organized and how they're expressed is grown phenomenally in the last few years. And sometimes we don't even have to know exactly what those genes stand for. We simply know how they're organized and where they might exist and when they might be turned down. Now, why is that important? Because in the next generation of varieties, as we look for new plant varieties of fruits and vegetables that will be better adapted to the environment we're growing in, be maybe more or less dependent on water, maybe less dependent on fertilizer, less dependent and more resistant to certain diseases and pests we have, we're going to need to have powerful tools to help us select and breed plant varieties much more quickly. Today we do this, it's called marker-assisted breeding. We can mark different segments of the DNA. I'm not talking about putting DNA in. I'm not talking about recombinant. I'm simply talking about marking what's there. And breeders then can go and digest that DNA and in a matter of minutes know that the genes that they've equated with increased yield are there. So that's something I want to carry forward. That's something I'm going to put in my breeding program. This one over here is only about half of what I wanted. So you know what? I'll take that over here. So the breeding programs become much more efficient, much more cost-effective to run, and it'll help us breed new varieties. That same technology is going to have a tremendous impact on the way we do food safety. Let's face it, all of us in the produce industry want to do one thing at the end of the day. We want to increase consumption of fruits and vegetables for a lot of different reasons. It's good for our business, it's good for public health, it's good for the world. But we can't do that completely while we're still fighting issues around food safety. So now you go back to those genetic techniques I was talking about, increased computational capacity. Today we can actually take a microorganism and we can map its DNA, an entire chromosome, in a matter of 8 hours. And we can do 7 or 8 or 10 of those at a time the way the machines are currently set up. In the future, we'll do that for less than $1. And we'll do it in less than an hour with the capacities that are going forward today. So why is that important? Because for the first time, we're going to be able to identify pathogens that are causing these problems, where they are in our facilities or our fields, in our packing houses. We'll be able to trace back and do what is known as a root cause analysis and find out how they're getting into our systems and devise ways to prevent that from ever happening. We'll also be able to take that genetic map and we'll be able to marry it up with what is known as metadata. Where does that organism come from? When was the last time we saw it? What food was it associated with the last time we saw it? How many people were sick? What were the solutions the last time we saw it? That data then can be used and married up, so now when there's an outbreak we read in some place in Illinois, by knowing that organism, we'll be able to narrow down very quickly on what the potential food groups are and what the conditions might be to have caused that to be there and help us greatly in the service of public health. And we see that going on today. FDA is undergoing, and CDC are undergoing a revolution today based on their ability to do genomics. They're basically replacing the way we do public health by being able to have this data, to generate it quickly, and to have the databases and the ability to call up that information to assist them when they're looking at outbreaks of disease. More exciting than that, to me, though, is really understanding how these pathogen genomes are regulated. You know, today, if we spot one in a test, we're automatically in a recall mode, and everybody in this room that's in the produce industry fears that actuality because it upsets industry. It's a tremendous disruption to public health, to public confidence in our products, and to our own operations. But the truth of the matter is that we don't really know if those pathogens would indeed cause disease if they were consumed. Somebody said a while ago, all pathogens in biology, nothing is the same. And while they may have the genetic capacity to make people sick, it doesn't mean those genes will be expressed. And so we're beginning to see in our research and experimentation the importance of the regulatory nature of those genes. Would they be expressed? An organism living out in a lettuce field on a leaf of lettuce is not in its ideal environment, right? It wants to be in your gut, where it's dark and warm and full of nutrition. Sitting out there in the wind, in the sun, under dry conditions is not so good. It's like us on a Sunday afternoon watching football, right? You tend to want to just nod off. Well, that's exactly what that bacteria has done. It's going into stasis. So now if it's consumed, would it really cause illness? And what might we do if it's in that weakened state to simply rid it from the surface of that lettuce leaf once we get it into our processing plants or packing houses? The genetic answers may be there, and the data we have today between genetics and computational capacity will probably get us those answers. I think the last thing that I'll end on, because there's just so much that one could speculate on what technology is going to mean for the fruit and vegetable industry, is actually walking in the room right now. It's people. You know, technology is great, but without the people that understand how to use it and manipulate it, harvest that information that we call big data, that confusing pile of data that we don't know how to really tap into sometime. Without the students that understand this, that have grown up with this kind of information, this kind of facility to play with these things all day long and figure out exactly how to make them work properly, then the technology will be slowed as it applies to fruit and vegetable industry. So the real challenge for us is how do we attract that young talent into our business? You know, how do we get those folks to look at ag as a career? It's not only a career, but an exciting career. We are at the forefront of technology, where it's rewarding the things, the impact you can have in terms of creating more food to feed that 9 billion people that Tom talked about, is actually at the foremost of what your goals and objectives are. So that's why it's so exciting here to be here today at CSUMB, where I understand from my discussions this morning there's actually the potential for a major in agribusiness coming along, because it'll be a great way to help get the young people that are going to drive this industry in the next generation involved. And perhaps this emerging technology will be the point of excitement that gets people involved in our industry to bring the next generation of ideas to our industry as we go forward. So with that, I will give the mic back to Dennis.
Thank you, Bob, and terrific comments. Those of us in the produce industry, when we travel and we go to a new city, we always like to do store checks. You know, go look at the produce aisle. And Bob, after those comments, I don't think that store check will ever be quite the same. I'll have, thinking of the future and all the possibilities, besides who's got what, will be uppermost in my mind. So terrific comments, and thanks for sharing those. Next up is Kevin Murphy, and I took a quick look at his official bio, and I looked at the first sentence, and it says Kevin Murphy is the CEO of Driscoll's. Driscoll's grows and markets fresh strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries worldwide. Talk about an understatement. Then you read the next sentence, and they go, oh, okay. They are headquartered and yada yada yada, 20 countries, and operations in 20 countries and sales in more than 60 countries. Talk about a platform. And if there's one thing technology likes, along with Driscoll's, is a global platform, and all that might entail. What I had the opportunity to many years ago to work with Kevin when we were both at Fresh Express, different forks in the road. I chose radicchio, he chose strawberries. He is much brighter than me, which is why he is the panelist and I am the moderator. But what's also really important about Kevin's career is he's really chronicled in a very direct way a lot of the technology that has come into the industry and the shifts that come in the industry. And he'll have some great comments. Kevin and I were chatting this morning, and he used to work for a company called Transfresh. And decades ago, Bruce Church had the foresight to buy the Tektrol technology from the Whirlpool Corporation. So we've been hanging around technology for a while. And then with Fresh Express, the leader in packaged salad and all the packaging technology. So Kevin has just a great oversight on the fresh world that is to come. So please welcome Kevin Murphy.
good news, I didn't have to fight Dennis for the mic. I had my own mic here, so it's good. So as Dennis mentioned, my career over 25 years in the Salinas Valley has been with a number of great firms. I started out originally at Bruce Church, and interestingly enough, I think Bruce Church was the first one of the first companies in the lettuce industry here. I think they started growing lettuce back in the late 20s, early 30s, and I think they were one of the companies that pioneered sprinkler irrigation. So in the old days, you used to furrow irrigate everything, and it wasn't a very efficient use of water. And there was an individual who I actually got to meet who had pioneered that technology. It had come from other places, but pioneered it in the Salinas Valley. And then to Transfresh, who I worked for them. These are all sister companies, but Transfresh pioneered the modified and controlled atmosphere technology that you see around in the produce industry that actually spawned, I think, the packaged salad industry in many ways, and that's how Fresh Express really got its headway. And that company went from 0 to $1 billion in sales, I think, in less than 10 years. So that was a tremendous use of technology. And then over the last 10 years, I've been at Driscoll's, and Driscoll's is a global company, as Dennis mentioned, but it's been using technology, especially around varieties and breeding unique varieties for a variety of different purposes, but has created a very strong brand around the world based on technology. So I've been extremely lucky to work over more than 25 years for these groups of companies that have been using technology to create a competitive advantage in the marketplace, because in many ways, that's really what is at the heart of the matter here. So, technology in itself is really worthless. The real value of technology is how you use it. Whether you use it to create innovative products, whether you use it to improve the quality or the delight of your product, whether you use it to drive costs down, that's the key. And it's got to be valuable in the sense that in the end, the consumers pay for everything, and they have to be comfortable with what they're eating, and they're willing to fork out those valuable dollars for you. So I think as we look at technology and how we use it, you've got to always remember that the consumer pays for everything is at the heart of the whole issue. So as Dennis mentioned, we're in over 20 countries, all the way from China to Australia to Africa to Europe and of course in California. And so that gives me a really great opportunity to look around and see what's going on. And it's very interesting because here in California, we're actually behind. We're way behind. And specifically in the Salinas Valley, which is hard for us sometimes to stomach, because in many ways the Salinas Valley was the sort of center of produce, certainly in the U.S. and around the world. But what's happened here is it's been so easy. And what I mean by that is there's been a lot of hard work, but when I mean easy, we have just this incredible climate. It's the best place to grow strawberries and lettuce and broccoli in the world. There's nothing like it, and as I said, I get to see a lot of places, and it is without doubt the best place to grow these things. Secondly, for the most part, there's been enough water, so we've been able to grow them kind of as we please. And then the third part, which is not an insignificant part, is labor has been abundant, and it's been cheap because a lot of it came from Mexico, some of it illegal. For many years, you would grow the crop, and on Monday morning, you would get ready to pick it, and there would be people waiting at your farm ready to go. And so there was this cheap form of labor. So we had great climate, enough water, let's put it that way, and enough labor to pick it at a fairly low and cheap cost. And so there's really no need to innovate beyond that. And that is at the heart of the problem. So when I go to China, for example, we've got an operation going on in China right now in Yunnan province, we're down near the Thai border, and we have a substrate farm there. So it's using substrate production with clean water, sophisticated tunneling. It's got all the latest technology in the berry industry, and that's the way we started there, because that's where the way the technology is. And because you can't grow it in the ground there because the soil's not very good. You have to clean the water because the water's not that good. You have to use tunnels because the climate's not that good. So you're forced to try and manage these variables, and you can do it in a really great way, and we're producing raspberries there for the Chinese market, and people are really excited about them. So that's the issue that we've got here in the Salinas Valley, is that in some ways we've been able to do a really good job and not really have to think in terms of technology. But that's all changing. So those days are over, and I think we're now going to be faced with how do we innovate, because labor is not as abundant as it once was. There's just not enough people to pick the crops that are getting grown here in the Salinas and Pajaro valleys. There's no question about that. Water is a huge issue. It's really not enough of it around, and you know, the whole question of climate change has turned our summers into they're a lot warmer. I don't know what the facts are, but something like the last 10 years, 7 or 6 of the summers have been the hottest on record over the last 100 years. So we're seeing change here. So that climate, that amount of water, and that labor are gone. So here in the Salinas Valley, we have to make some significant changes. And I think technology usually arrives at your back door when necessity is required. Was the necessity is the mother of invention, if I'm not mistaken? Right?
Stole my line.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's the problem when you get lost in line. So anyway, and I think that's going to be the impetus to get a lot of this change. So you're going to see a lot of, certainly in the berry industry, you're going to see a lot of substrate production. You're going to see what we call tabletops, where you get the product off the ground so people can pick them easier. You're going to see some types of tunneling. I think you're going to see, this vertical farming that's here. I think you're going to see a lot of greenhouse stuff. There's going to be a lot of innovation, and it's going to be quite disruptive, and it's going to impact the Salinas Valley and the Pajaro Valley. How well we as an industry here in the Pajaro and the Salinas Valleys adapt to that will be really, very interesting. So I don't quite know how it's going to break, but I do know it's going to be different, and that's important. So the last comment I'd like to make is what I refer to as the consumer paradox. So and let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. Is most consumers think of their produce, they think of a small family farm, probably organically grown, family folks working on the farm, and you know, in a beautiful area of California. That's the kind of image they want their produce to come from, and that is quite powerful. And many companies, including our own, market their product around some of those concepts. Now, Driscoll's does have a lot of small independent farmers. I think we have about 600 of them around the world, and so we like to think that we're promoting that particular approach, and we think it's a good one. Unfortunately, with the way technology is going, that's going to start becoming more and more incongruent. That's where the paradox is. And what I mean by that is you're going to see a lot of lab-type settings with big warehouse, factory-type environments where you can control the inputs. You don't have to use pesticide, you don't have to use fumigants. There's a whole lot of good reasons, but it's not going to jive well with our vision of a small family organic farm. So I don't know the answer to this one. I just know that it's sort of, for the marketers in the world, it's going to be a little bit of this interesting dilemma, because certainly vertical farming does a great job of maximizing output from minimizing input. It takes away the variability of weather. You don't have to use pesticides, fumigants. It's got a lot of really, really great things. But if the average consumer sees how they're getting their lettuce, I'm not sure that would jive with them. So again, I put it out there just because it's a sort of a paradox and something that we'll have to solve for. We at Driscoll's will be working hard to try and solve them. We have lots of money that we spend on innovation around genetics and robotic harvesting and all sorts of things. And so we're really, really interested in seeing where this all goes. But it's here. It's going to happen. I'm not sure how the consumer is going to take it and think about it. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Kevin. All right. Terrific comments. And next up, Lori Koster, the CEO and chairman of Mann Packing. And I'm particularly delighted to introduce Lori. And again, you can take a look at the formal remarks about her bio. But I think there's a couple of things that are really important to note prior to the comments Lori's going to make. She is somebody who really sees the big picture also, but she also has had the opportunity to be involved in the early stages of, besides being third generation, so she is, the valley just flows through every fiber of her being, but she was also involved the produce.com revolution in the late 1990s. She is a fabulous communicator. She's a publisher and a great marketeer, and really one of the great innovators in our industry, doing some simple things like, oh, the things we grow might actually, it's not really produce, it's a food, we're in the food business, and leading the shift of incorporating the culinary world. Or when they introduced broccoli slaw, that notion of utilizing all of the plant, and the issue of full plant utilization, right now that's been a produce industry conversation, but if you marry that thought with Bob's comments, the opportunities that each vegetable is its own universe, where are we heading? And so I can't think of a better person to close the comments so far from our panelists than Lori Koster. Lori?
Thank you, Dennis. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to comment briefly on our business model for those of you in the room that don't know, and then talk about some technologies we're using today, not so much production technologies, but that are used in the marketplace. I'm a sales and marketing professional. I'm not a scientist. My kids teach me how to use my iPhone, and I don't even do that very well. But we're a 76-year-old company. We're a grower, shipper, and a fresh cut processor. So we harvest the crops. We bring them into processing facilities where we cut them, we wash them, we bag them, we put them in boxes and ship them throughout the United States and Canada. We have a 16-day shelf life on these products. So we have 16 days to get them from field to fork, which we call in the industry, from harvest through the supply chain into the grocery store or the food service distributor's warehouse, onto the shelf, and then ultimately at home to the consumer or to the chef. So a lot of the technologies we use are post-harvest technologies, microperforation, patterns in the packaging, modified atmosphere to keep the product as fresh and to extend the shelf life as long as possible, certain containers that can help prevent temperature abuse. Our products should be stored at 34 degrees, and we know that that doesn't happen all the time throughout the supply chain. We farm probably 30,000 crop acres a year, and I would love to do a formula with you to see how many tiers that would take in vertical farming, because I agree that the future is on rooftop and vertical farms. They definitely are going to be needed to supplement source production agriculture. But drones are going to be used, if not, more and more, to monitor our fields. We've got this fleet of white pickup trucks. I think every produce company in Salinas has got this fleet of white pickup trucks. They put over 100,000 miles a year on them, driving out from ranch to ranch to ranch to look at this well and how's this stand on this field. And imagine being able to send drones out to do all of that for you much more efficiently. And again, the data, just auto-fed into the cloud or wherever it goes again. Not the techie. I'm very excited about the future of robotics in the industry. At the Ag Tech Summit, we saw some really cool robotics that I know they're doing a lot of berry productions in pots, and the robots go out and pick up the bucket and bring it to a station where a person can sit or stand and pick the berries. Well, imagine sugar snap peas. I need 650 people a day to harvest our sugar snap peas, and they're on their hands and knees. Let's face it, people. So labor availability, not a lot of people want to do that. But imagine if that harvest function moved to a station where they could sit or stand. Well, all of a sudden, the amount of people that want to do that work just grew greatly. So very excited about the future of robotics. And I think the vertical farming, you can harvest these crops standing up, sitting down. So it's another benefit there. Traceability is huge. A lot of technology is really enhancing our industry in that regard. We talked about disrupting technologies yesterday at the Economic Partnership Summit, and look what Uber's done to the taxi industry. Look what Airbnb is about to do to the hotel industry. I mean, they're terrified. So I think about Uber, and when I ask for that card, I can see it coming around the corner. Here it comes, here it comes. So it's 5 feet away. Imagine when we load these trucks in Salinas over 2,000 trucks a day, and being able to see in real time, oh, it got stuck over the Rockies because of that storm, better tell the customer, the warehouse has to be open later, it's going to be 12 hours late. So I'm really excited about traceability technologies. When we use in the marketplace, historically, my dad, my grandfather's day, we used to do a lot of bunch broccoli. So when we'd go out and do store checks that he talked about, usually you could only tell by the color of the rubber band whose broccoli it was. So Diorigo had pink, Man Packing had red, I think Ocean Mist had blue. So you'd go into a store and you go, oh, it's a red rubber band. It must be my broccoli. Well, today we have the benefit of a universal product code, and it scans across that in the supermarket. All that data is fed in. We're able to buy it. It tells us how we're selling, where we're selling. It tells us the effectiveness of our promotions. Do we maintain any lift? It tells us how well our competitors' products are selling. So when you launch a new product, the grocer is not just, the first thing they're going to say is, where do I put it? What product do I take off my shelf to make room for your new product? Because there's no room in the grocery store for new products. So the syndicated data from these barcodes enables us to do space-to-sales analysis, and we can say, well, that product is selling at this velocity, this product's selling a lot faster, get rid of that one and put this one in. So it's been very effective. We can tell basket card affiliations, what other products are they buying when they're buying your product. So if you want to do a promotion with another food company, you can go into them and say, hey, look, they're buying Foster Farms chicken at the same time they're buying broccoli coleslaw. Let's do a promotion together. You go into Costco and their membership cards. They know what you're buying, when you're buying, how often you're buying it, what you're buying it for. But the trade-off there is when you go in the spring, there's your favorite display of beach towels, because they know that you're going to want to buy a beach towel because summer's coming. So it really benefits the marketplace in a lot of ways, because the sales data is easier to get to. I agree that the population growth is, we're going to have to create a lot more food for a lot more people. Land availability is an issue. Organic land availability is a bigger issue. What we're seeing with the water situation in California, a lot of the valley growers are coming over to our valley. All of a sudden they're growing carrots in the Salinas Valley, and we're like, hey, wait a minute. This is our valley. Get back over to yours. So the water war thing is starting to creep in for sure. But we also have land use policies, and if we look at vertical farming or creating that, a lot of people in Monterey County like their view sheds. So when we try to talk about building buildings on ag land to go up, there's political issues as well. But I think the urban areas and the rooftop farming is definitely a way to go there. Another technology I think that's going to impact the industry is online sales. How many of you live in California, born and raised? Okay, so we're in this utopia, right? I mean, we've got the Monterey Bay out the window. We've got the Salinas Valley over here. Well, I have an intern that just went to the University of Alabama, and she called me and she goes, Lori, the lettuce is so old. She grew up here, and now she's in Alabama, and let's face it, the lettuce is probably 10 to 12 days old. Imagine if University of Alabama had a vertical farm where they could grow their own lettuce. So online sales, I think direct-to-consumer sales, imagine if you could put a face with the farm and go online and skip that 10, 12-day supply chain and get fresh produce to your door overnight. So I'm kind of excited about that model. And that Amazon and Fresh Directs of the world, they still have the 10 to 12 days, where if you could go direct to us. So online sales might be a way of the future. If any of you could develop an app for that, I'd appreciate it. And finally, green waste. If any of you could develop a technology for us to get rid of our green waste, we talk about using 100% of the plant. What we don't harvest, we leave in the field. It's disked into the soil, provides nutrients there. But throughout the processing, we have truckloads and truckloads of culls, little pieces of broccoli, cauliflower, lettuce. It's fed to livestock right now, so it's not technically going to waste, but there's a company that was at the Ag Tech Summit, and they're taking this waste and turning it back into a liquid fertilizer that can be injected back into the soil. So green waste technologies would be great if you could bring something our way.
Good. Thank you, Lori. I'm told Lori doesn't need to carry around a PO book at Man, so that request for an app, if you just put per Lori, I think you're in business. So for all you entrepreneurs in the audience, there's your challenge. Before we talk a little bit amongst ourselves, I can't resist asking Tom a little bit, having made your comments and then listening to this group. What are your thoughts as the engineer of what our ag friends had to say? I'd give you my mic, but despite all the comments that I went, except I can't reach you.
I think some of the comments that hit me first actually were Kevin's about the ideal climate and plentiful water and labor that we have in this particular valley. Because okay, I stand corrected, because certainly necessity does frequently or most often drive technology. So there is a lot of technology that's grown in the Salinas Valley that's matured and been used for farming, but it's a different kind of technology from areas that don't have these more ideal situations that we have had. So I think that is going to be has been the necessity that other people have had in other areas of the world to do that growing. So I realized as I was doing some of this research and work on this talk that a lot of that emerging technology is occurring in those areas where they do have limitations.
Thanks, Tom. A couple of things before we get started talking amongst ourselves. If questions are occurring to you and you already know them and want to get them written down, and then whoever's gathering those up, if you want to begin a little shuttle up here, we'll find a very natural transition to your questions. But I'm going to, this group was pretty good. I'm going to guess you have a few. But Kevin, I'm kind of reminded of a conversation we had in your office several months ago now, where we were talking about the Steinbeck Innovation Group, and you looked at me and said, I want to know what a farm is going to look like in 20 years. Now, Tom showed us one version, out in the Central Coast, we're the fresh crowd. We're not the wheat and grain crowd. So what does that fresh farm look like 20 years from now? Is that picture starting to emerge a little bit in your mind?
Yeah, I actually, again, there's a company called Prever, which is a big sophisticated irrigation company in Holland, and the CEO there I've got to know quite well, and she describes ag in this 1 to 10 range. So 1 is subsistence farming, and 10 is vertical farming, like Tom talked about. And then in between there, you've got this whole range of things. So the Salinas Valley farming, and I'm going to use a gross generalization here, but we're probably in the 5 or 6. And then you get into, tunneling, and then ultimately you get into more sophisticated greenhouses, and you ultimately end up at the vertical farming where Tom's at. And the work ahead is, where do we end up? It doesn't always mean you jump right to the end and you go to vertical farming. That might work well in Beijing, China, for example, where the weather's terrible, there's lots of other things, there's lots of rooftops, there's lots of stuff that you can do. It might turn out to be quite a viable system. But you might end up with something like a 7, where you have a tunnel and you're growing it in pots and it's substrate, and it's not as sophisticated as in the cities, but you could be in a country like Morocco, where the labor's cheap, the weather's good, there's enough water in some of these locations that you can produce a great piece of fruit or vegetable and be quite competitive in the marketplace. So when Dennis says, what's the farm of the future look like, I think a lot depends on the inputs that go into it. That there are places in the world that still, as I said, cheap labor, or relatively cheap labor, water, and the right kind of climate where you can produce a good quality fruit and get it to the marketplace at the right price. And so I think the farm of the future depends where you live. So if you're in Beijing, it's going to be vertical farming. If you live in Morocco, it's a little bit more sophisticated than we have today, but maybe not all the way.
Okay. Lori, what are your thoughts?
I agree. It's going to be a hodgepodge of technologies. I think necessity is going to be the mother of invention, and depending on where you are and again, it could be even, I don't mean to be negative, but it could be politically driven, the options that you're able to use.
Okay. Bob, how about yourself?
Yeah, no, I think it's been pretty much said. I think a lot of times the economics are going to drive it. I think certain crops perhaps lend themselves to vertical farming, and I'd be interested in maybe Tom's comments on the relative costs of vertical farming now. What are the hurdles that still need to be overcome to make that something that is maybe more amenable to a wider range of crops? Because I think that's going to be a big piece of how that extreme, as Kevin would have it, is going to play out in our future.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of factors that will come into effect in reducing costs in the vertical farming. Probably the first one is going to be robotics, because at Acopi Farms we're still using a fair amount of labor. Initially, for example, in planting the seeds for the seedlings, this was done through a manual process, but then we had pneumatic equipment in that was doing the planting, so that was then automated and reduced that human component. With human components, you do have a lot more opportunity for error, for human error, in fact. And so I think you'll get a better productivity. You'll get higher yields by having robotics. So I think that's one area that's going to be important. Another one with indoor farming is that you have to produce the artificial light. Yeah. And the advances that are going on right now in LED technology are significant. Those costs, as the volume of LEDs gets higher, that's going to drive the cost down further. One other advantage of LEDs is they run on DC voltage, not AC. So this means that we could make efficient use of solar panels, because you don't have to go through an inverter, through a process of converting that to AC and back to DC. So you could get less loss in going from the solar panel down. So I think those are the two areas that we'll see big changes.
I'd be just interested, what came first, chicken or the egg? Is it the LED light that's kind of catalyzed the interest in vertical farming, or was it the urbanization and maybe cutting the supply chain?
Probably what came first was growing dope.
I thought that's what you were going to say.
Yeah. In fact, yeah. In fact, one of the things that we're able to do within an indoor farm is really provide a lot of traceability, because literally every single tray of product, you could go from seed lot to the tray it was grown in, barcode that tray, RFID tag to get a location of that tray. You can follow it all the way through to where that's harvested and goes off to a restaurant. So you get the full traceability. In fact, I was recently talking, we had a son's birthday that was in Colorado, and I was visiting with a person there who was involved with their growing of the sacred herb. And it turns out that growing they're doing is heavily regulated. I mean, literally each plant is barcoded and tracked through the whole process. So that's just a little vision, I think, of what happens with the indoor farming. You're able to actually go through that.
Yeah, the interesting comment for us here in the Salinas Valley is if you look at disruptive technologies, which I think this is an element of a disruptive technology, is they're usually not generated by the existing industry. So you look at the computer industry and Apple and what they did, and there's plenty of examples where you had new technology that came in and really changed the game. The issue, I don't know what 70–80% of the fruits and some vegetables in the U.S. are grown in California, but this new technology is not getting propagated or furthered by the industry here. It's people like Tom and others who are not encumbered by traditional thinking. They're not encumbered by the infrastructure and the assets as they carry today. Much like Xerox and Hewlett-Packard were encumbered by their thinking back at the time when then along came Apple and some of the others, and they didn't have to worry about that stuff. They didn't have to worry about what drove the P&L at that particular moment. And I think there's enough of this going on that we have to be really careful here in the Salinas Valley that we don't lose sight of the fact that we have no right. It's not our right to have this business. It's a gift, and we got to be really, really smart about taking care of it and being open to innovation. Although sometimes it's almost impossible to do, because you're just a victim of your history, right? And unfortunately, that gets in the way. So I know for us at Driscoll's, we're thinking about this. We're doing a lot of work. in this area. We're working with people overseas and other places because we need to have a hand in it, because if it does move fast in this direction, we need to be part of it. But for most people that are here in this room, they're from the Salinas Valley, and I would encourage us this could be disruptive. It's not incremental, and that means a lot.
There are lots of questions, so let's see what we can get through here. First of all, and this may be Lori and Kevin, though Bob and Tom certainly feel free to comment. Describe your ag innovation process. Obviously, there are a lot of technology companies looking for customers. They have products, services. How do you go about taking a look at what you want and test it with, and so you're minimizing the amount of time you may have to take a look at something and money? How do you go about looking at new things and new technology?
Well, we go to trade shows. We'll go to the Big Pack Expo and, look at what other categories are using, what type of packaging they're using. We have an innovation week where we bring vendors in, and we call it the Dog and Pony Show. They show us all their latest and greatest. One packaging company just gave me an example of, gum and how you push the gum out of the foil thing now. Well, that was the pharmaceutical industry was using that for the Tylenol and stuff. And the gum guys said, hey, we should package gum that way. So kind of, what are other industries doing that could apply to us? In terms of process, we use a stage gate product development process. We've modified it to our company. I think we've got 5 gates, stop, no-go, levers, so to speak. But going to market now, we do a lot more test marketing because the customers want some proven data to show that the concept's been vetted thoroughly and consumers are adapting it.
Okay, Kevin?
Yeah, so Driscoll's really, its mission is to continually delight consumers. So our whole purpose is to delight consumers. It sort of like drives the company. We have this word delight that we use a lot, and you can ask anyone in the company and I'll give you a definition for delight and what makes up delight and all these things. So we take it seriously, which is great because there's no confusion about what we're trying to do. So for us, it's all about putting delightful fruit out there. And so most of our innovation, at least up until now, and will continue, is all about creating these great genetics. So through breeding, natural breeding programs, we've really tried to advance the quality of the berries. And so we spend tens of millions of dollars a year, literally, on breeding. And the way technology is really coming to us right now is sort of molecular markers. Bob talked about that. I think he did a nice job. There's all these new technologies, big data, molecular markers, how you go about that. You can really speed up your selection process. So instead of growing a seedling and then you look at the seedling and ultimately the fruit and then you select and then you grow some more. Anyway, it takes us 7 years to bring a variety from the first stage to commercialization. So it's a long period of time. But with these new technologies and the ability to compute big data, we can cut that down dramatically. So for us, these new technologies are really all about trying to get this delightful fruit in the hands of the consumers faster and quicker. And that's kind of what drives a lot of our work. Of course, there's production technologies that are going on. We talked about substrate and a lot of the other things. There's really 3, if you look at it, it's quite simple. There's really 3 buckets. If you want to put a great piece of fruit or vegetable in the hand of the consumers, you have 3 main buckets. You have the genetics, which describes the full potential, right? Then you have the growing and the harvesting, and how well you do that gets you close to that full potential, correct? And then ultimately you have the supply chain, which is time and temperature. And how well you handle it and how quickly you get it in the hands of the consumer also takes it up there. So at the end of this little sort of graph, or whatever you want to call it, what the consumer gets in their hands is really a function of the genetics. How good could it be? How well did you grow and harvest it, and how quickly and how well did you handle it into the hands of the consumer? And the companies that do that better tend to have more delightful fruit. So when you think of technology, I always think of it in those 3 buckets. How do you work on getting the genetics is good, grow it and harvest it as well, and then make sure it gets to the consumer as fast and as cold as possible. And in the end, the consumer pays for everything. I've said that before. They will decide whether it works or not. You really don't get to do that. So, but I do know they better put better fruit in their hands. They will pay for it, and they'll usually pay a premium.
Bob?
Yeah, I would just add, we have the advantage of having two of the most innovative companies in the industry sitting right here. So their process is one that's tried and true. But I think if you look across the industry, in fact, you look across a lot of different industries, it really is about business culture. It really is about rewarding failure. It kind of sounds opposite and odd, doesn't it? But when you're trying to do new products, or you're trying to respond to the environment, your business environment you're in and meet consumer needs, probably the biggest sin you can make is to sit on your hands and do nothing. That's the thing that really will cause your business to fail. What will perpetuate your business and move you to new directions is to be willing to try new things and to try them quickly, fail fast, learn, fine-tune, re-enter the marketplace, and go back again. And it's really having that innovative culture, as we've kind of already hinted today. It's real easy sometimes to sit back and get comfortable with what you do because that's where your investment is. It's been successful in the past. But as we go forth, being open to changes, being open to making basic changes in the way you do your business and embracing innovation is really a hard task for a lot of businesses, especially smaller ones, to do. And I think we all need to just bear in mind, I mean, there's been some classic failures. Somebody asked about VHS tapes. I think it was Tom when he started. I'm older, so I go back even further. And one of the classic examples you use is photography. When I was a kid, you couldn't watch television for more than 2 seconds and not see a Kodak commercial. I mean, they were all over. They had their own theme music. They had famous actors involved, the whole thing. Maybe what some of you don't know is that they actually had the patent technology on digital photography, but didn't do anything with it. And today they're virtually gone compared to what they were before. So, you know, really having that innovation and recognizing when it's time to change is an important thing to make sure you keep in mind.
Dennis, I just want to quickly add, sometimes it helps to be stubborn. And the fact that we're a privately held family-owned business, when we launched broccolini, it was a new-to-the-world vegetable. We had to figure out how to grow it. We didn't know what it was going to yield, but we knew it tasted so good. For 3-4 years, we didn't make a penny. We lost a ton of money. But we eventually figured it out. And if we were publicly traded, there's no way we would have had that 3 years. So.
One of the things I didn't mention, one of my favorite speeches I heard Lori give when she was honored as our industry's Produce Marketer of the Year. She thanked her team as you would expect her to, but she said one of the things I was blessed with were great gut instincts. And so you can easily see those at play with that comment. Before we move on to a couple of other questions, and I must add, and I need to warn you, some of the questions are pointed and even political. Imagine that. Who knew in Monterey County? But Tom, I think everyone would be.
Take the first one. I get the first punch.
Yeah. No. You're not in harm's way yet. Though, question, having heard some of the comments about how the ag folks look at innovation and having done a few startups and as an engineer and now wandering into the wonderful world of potentially the future of farming, what's the innovation process look like in the Silicon Valley, just in broad strokes?
So innovation process, what does it look like in Silicon Valley? Well, I think one of the things that really excited me about getting involved in agriculture and farming was that a lot of Silicon Valley focus right now is on social media, social networks. And to be frank, I was a little tired of that. I mean, that seems like an area that's really well trod at this point in time. And so the idea of going into something that was really very new was something that was particularly attractive. So having said that, there is a lot of innovation that's going on in the Valley that has to do with the Internet of Things and big data. I think it's the Internet of Things. It's the potential for what you can do when literally everything is connected. And from your commute to work, knowing where all the stoplights are at what time, sensing the traffic and where it's out there, a lot of those things are available right now. But do you mind what I've done when I've at the outset of startups. One typical technique is to do kind of the classic word brainstorming. You sit there and try to come up with a bunch of ideas. Some of them tend to be pretty crazy. Some of them, I think the best ones have to do with things that you would use yourself. So it would be a product that you would like to use, which is much more effective in trying to convey the passion for an idea to somebody. Because if it's something you're going to use, you can, I think, convince somebody else that it's something that they would want to buy and they want to use. So I describe it as that being very important. When I talk to innovators and talk about what it takes for innovation, I describe curiosity. You've got to be very, very curious, I think, to come up with innovation. Curiosity had to do with the early days of the PC. It had to do with the early days, the first CD audio player that came out. I remember Gary Kildall, the gentleman I worked with at Digital Research that invented CPM. He came to me with this CD audio player and said, Tom, this is digital data. We can store things on this, and just sat there and did a brainstorming process about what we could do with that technology. So toys, I think, are very, very important to innovation. Toys right now include things like drones and other devices. These get the curiosity, get the juices flowing. From that, you have to be inventive. You know, you see a technology, see a toy, something that you can work with, and you have an idea for a product. Now you've got to invent and create that solution. And that's where the perseverance and the trying it again and again comes into play. And all of this, as I described, takes passion.
We're going to make this like Jeopardy. I'm going to stay with Tom for 200. Okay. One of the things, you know, all of this conversation really raises, and I'm not at all surprised by the question. If you're a student sitting in the audience, how do I get prepared for this? And then some of the politics are even, how do I make sure that CSUMB makes sure I'm ready to go for that brave new world? And then, so in terms of skills, and then the other thing I'm going to throw in to just ask you to comment on is, as somebody who from the public sector has been involved in throwing a few dollars at economic development, you know, and that's only been going on for a few years. Do you know I often get asked, how come we don't have a Google yet? So how do we get what should they be studying, and how come we don't have a Google yet, and how long will it take?
Yeah, I think that, boy, mine goes through a lot of things in terms of approaches to take. What I tell students is that typical students, and I was pleased to learn about the number of first-generation students here at CSUMB. I was pleased to learn about what percentage of them. I've had a chance to meet a couple of classes, how many of them are working while going to school, and so forth. I think students have an opportunity to get engaged in new businesses because, first of all, they've been involved with change. Every semester, every quarter, classes change. So change is a part of their natural environment. Probably most of you, if you've been using a particular mail program or mail provider or whatever, you will stick with that. The students tend more to change from quarter to quarter, semester to semester, so they're adaptable to change. That's an excellent thing. Another is they've been living on a budget. A lot of them are working their way through school so that they're at a point where they don't need to have necessarily a big salary. Well, that's candy to the people that are funding these startups. Because what they want to give people is equity. They want to give you shares and not pay you very much per hour. So I think those are the kind of opportunities that students can look for when they come out of school.
Great, thank you. Just kind of running the table from my left to right. Lori, Kevin, and Bob, as you look at it, what are the skills that you see as being increasingly important if the students are preparing to come to work for MAN or Driscoll or another company to make sure they pay those dues to PMA?
I think math skills are critical. You should be a black belt in Excel if you're not already. Become one. That goes to the data crunching that I spoke to earlier that we do. And a lot of, back to basics, a lot of business communication is done via email today. So make sure that you know how to write properly.
Yeah, I would focus on this curiosity factor. I think it's so critical for anyone's career, whether you get into a startup or even a company. You got to have this intellectual curiosity, about trying to find things out. There's lots of people who come in and just do the work, but the ones that really get ahead are the ones that really understand and want to understand what's going on and how can they make it better. So to me, I think that's the single most important factor, is intellectual curiosity. And then the other one, which I think is really important, is some of the interpersonal skills. The ability to work with people, able to work on a team, improve things, be a collaborator, be a partner. You know, things don't get done by individuals. They get done by groups of people with a passion for getting something done. So the ability to be curious and then the ability to work with others, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think Kevin and Lori got it. The only thing I would add to it that, or maybe just emphasize, is the communication skills, being able to talk to people. I think we're worried, we talk all the time about, yeah, that's the problem. You know, with all the technology we have, everybody, we worry about whether it's easier to talk to people or simply text them or email them. And I know I make a habit personally, even if I'm in the office, and that's not all that much, but when I am there, I'll go down the hall and talk to somebody face to face to communicate with them, as opposed to just sending a note. I think you get a much more deeper context. I think, too, as our businesses become more engaged and more dependent on technology, there's a different way to learn. You can learn in terms of memorization of facts, but then there's a way to learn and put concepts together. And as you go through and you prepare in your classes, it may be easy or easier to get grades by simply be able to spit back what you've read in a textbook or heard in a lecture. But look at the concepts and the ability to think. That'll give you the dexterity that you're going to need to adapt to a changing world in a business environment. I'm a scientist by training, so one would think that being able to adapt to a business world would be very difficult to do. But what I found over the course of my career is that scientific training, that ability to look at concepts and maybe even visualize things in dimensions, actually is pretty handy when you're trying to deal with setting up a processing plant or trying to do contract for a field or something of that nature within our industry. That thought process serves you well. So look at the concepts, look at the deeper meaning behind some of what you're learning, and look for interactions between the things that you're learning. You know, this means this means this, therefore I can get to that. Those are really important ways of thinking that'll serve you well, and it'll also help you communicate complex issues to a workforce that needs to understand why they're doing something. And that's very important to be able to do.
Yes, Tom, please.
Yeah, comment I wanted to make has to do with what I see as the opportunity for the business and IT building. Because in my experience in starting companies, it is not just a technologist or it's not just a business person. It really does take a combination of the two. And having both the business school and technology, IT, within the same building, I think is a tremendous opportunity. Because those two people need to communicate. They need to talk together. The person in marketing sales needs to understand that the engineer will tell you how difficult something is based on whether he wants to do it or not. It helps then that business person may have some of that technical acumen, some ability, but certainly communicating, working between that business and IT technology side is very important.
Thanks, Tom. I'm gonna try and synthesize a couple of the questions here. And Bob, you used the phrase workforce training, and you know, all of the talk about the future is very exciting. Yet, as you might imagine, current workforces might be somewhat concerned if they do their own personal math. And we're talking about drones and robots, and you know, is that taking jobs or creating jobs? And then if you're currently in the workforce, does technology displace you, or how does the industry go about training people so they're able to participate in the new technical world that's coming? So that's kind of, so that we're talking about opportunity, but on the other hand, are there some things to be really concerned about the future?
Yeah, I think anytime you see changes like this, there's going to be those that see it as opportunity and others find anxiety associated with it. I think we're clearly creating opportunities. The technology, as somebody said earlier, is really as only good as what you do with it. And one of the pieces of what you do with it is having the people that understand it, that can push it to the limits or adapt it to the particular business situation that you're in. And so there's going to be a tremendous opportunity, I believe, for people who are comfortable with technology that to go into the various businesses in ag and to be able to adapt the new technologies or identify new opportunities for some of these technologies to improve business practices. I think that is going to be, one of the real benefits of some of this technology. The key for us, of course, is going to be attracting people to ag. I mean, the statistics show that people don't want to go into ag. It's the least sexy job market, and we have a foundation for talent at PMA that is devoted to trying to attract people into the produce industry. And we still have this stereotype in our head of some of the work that Lori described with people working very hard in a field in conditions that are not exactly inviting, or working in a processing plant at 35 or 36 degrees all bundled up. And a lot of people just don't see that as the future. So I think you'll see a change, a shift as we go forward. The technology that we're talking about today and some of the opportunities that we've talked about actually may be incentives to bring new folks into the industry. At the same time, there's a lot of folks already in the industry, and I don't have the answer for how we retrain and how we take those people and find new opportunities for them, except for as the generations change over, the next generation, the millennials and things, are so much more comfortable with technology than say my generation. Me and poor Lori are still trying to figure this thing out. And I think a lot of what we're going to be doing, it's not necessary that perhaps everybody understand exactly how to code the software that'll be used, but how to use it is what's going to be important. How to make sure that these things all work and link together, and what the stops are going to be, and what the metrics are going to be to measure success are going to be very important. So I don't think everybody has to have a PhD in coding or in engineering or whatever it might be, but we're going to have to identify what those positions are, and those in the younger generation that have so much more facility with these technologies, I think will find a home in the industry as we go forward. But as companies, we've got to look for those people and provide them resources. And I think universities like this have those training capabilities. The two-year schools have it. I think trade associations can help our members learn the key to try to attract and retrain people for the needs that we'll have in the future.
Thanks, Bob. Kevin, Lori, is it a perception or reality on displacement, or is it, as Bob alluded, more of transition to new types of jobs?
Well, for-profit companies are in business because they want to make money, right? I mean, they're the great companies are the ones that kind of balance that out pretty well. Again, the companies that get that and understand that profit is more than just making a dollar. But the reality is, companies and commerce will move to where it is. So if you're a worker in this system, it's going more towards this technology bent, which means you're going to have to get better at doing that. If you're a very labor-intensive type person, I think it's going to be a problem. If you don't have skills beyond just the labor, and I think a picker of strawberries, for example, is one of the most honorable jobs out there. It's hard work. It's great people. It's an incredible, hard-working job. So this is not a reflection on those people. In fact, I have a tremendous admiration for what those people do. Our business certainly, if you think about a picker of a strawberry, they're the only person that touches that strawberry before you as the consumer eats it. Even the farmer doesn't touch it. They farm it, once they plant it and grow it. I mean, there are quality control. There are just a whole bunch of things. So the human eye is an incredible thing. But as technology steps in, because that's the way business goes, if you're most skilled, I think you get a better job and you'll do better. So that would be my advice. keep getting skilled, because it's just only going to become more technical.
Okay. Lori?
I'll just add it's only going to become more competitive too. If you look at the sales and marketing functions, the store perimeter departments are where all the sales are. The center aisles, no one's shopping, no one's buying Duncan Hines cake mix anymore. So the people that are looking for jobs in the perishable industries they're coming from ConAgra, they're coming from these traditional consumer packaged goods companies. We have double-digit growth every year, knock on wood. To your point, plant-based diets, nutrition, the science is on our side. So if anything, I see it being more and more competitive for the higher skilled jobs.
Okay, thanks. One of the things I would just quickly add before we move on, it is important to note that Kevin's original comments also included a shortage of labor. So it isn't necessarily a given that folks are doing the jobs. Keep in mind, and just speaking of Monterey County itself, farming 250,000 acres a year on an annual basis. So that issue of shortage, there's probably a balance going forward, but all the jobs that the ag industry has to offer are not necessarily getting filled. Shifting gears a little bit, got a question about sustainability, which is a word we hear a lot about, and in our own industry, the metrics of that, definition of that, that's not an exact science, as it were, but thinking about sustainability, how do you see it playing a role in ag tech and the world to come? How do you equate those two words? And I'll let you just jump in as you like.
Sustainability isn't something in itself. So I think that's where certainly personally, that's where I think people get confused. Sustainability is good business. It's like anything. If you want to sustain your business, you've got to do the things that will allow it to sustain itself. So here in the Salinas Valley, if we don't have water, it's not a sustainable business. So how do we create a sustainable amount of water so we can do it? A couple things. You find new sources of water. That's one way. Another way is to use less of it. So there's this whole idea of how do you go about creating an ability to sustain your business for the next generation. That's how I look at this. It's not for the next year, it's for the next generation. So how do you grow things, in our case, in a way that allows the next generation to do some of that stuff? And that means you've got to assume some of these changes. So sustainability isn't a purpose in itself. The purpose is to maintain a business that can last for a generation. And I think that's really important, because sometimes we get people talking about sustainability as an abstract activity, but it's really not. It's sort of integral to how you sustain a business over a generation.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think technology has helped us measure our sustainability efforts, but again, these are ongoing efforts that we've always been doing, but it's been easier to put a number to it and communicate that out back to the customers.
Okay. Bob, being involved with a trade group, and typically these sorts of, when you hear that word, it's either equated to academia or trade groups in terms of framing a discussion. What are your views?
Well, I kind of look at technology not as the end game, but as tools that'll help us achieve sustainability. I agree with what Kevin said. I mean, ultimately, sustainability is about keeping your business functioning. It's about keeping the source of employment, the products going out to the marketplace. It's about making sure that your business stays profitable. Ultimately, that's a measure of sustainability that's very important. Now, to do that, you have to take care of your resources. So water and fertilizers and things of that nature are all part of that, and how you treat your land. I mean, that's really the legacy of a lot of the businesses here, is the productivity of this land. Technology will help us, endure that. We might change it. It might not look like what we do today down the road, but technology will be the tools that allow us to build sustainable business. So in the near term, it might be things like, new varieties that don't require as much water, or it might be, hoop houses and things of that nature that reduce the amount of pesticides and things like that we might use, or preserve water better. So I think all of these are tools that will help us become more sustainable going forward. As far as the measures and the metrics, I mean, there's a lot of debate over how to do that. There's a lot of efforts on how to make these measures, but again, I would point to the productivity of the land. I would point to the productivity in enduring business model, the people that are employed, and the good that comes from the products that are produced here. I mean, I think one thing we got to keep our eye on all the time is that the number one health issue we have in our country is obesity. At the end of the day, that's contributing to a lot of the underlying disease we see. And the antidote for that, a lot of times, is a fruit and vegetable diet, as we've already talked about. So all of these things kind of, all merge together in one biological system that's kind of dynamic. But the technologies will be the enablers to help us meet new challenges that are out there, this changing environment that Kevin talked about. That's happening all over the world in various locales. And so technology will be the enabler to help us be more sustainable as we go forward in the future.
Great, thanks. A couple of other questions. There are a few questions that are interested in taking waste out of the supply chain. Obviously, we get it all started and then put it on the road. But how is the industry looking at whether as a grower, shipper, processor, or trade groups? What are some of the initiatives around driving waste out of the supply chain, and what do you see your role in that? And whoever.
So it gets back to this carbon footprint, and certainly as the price of gas has declined, that sort of got lost some of its intensity. And it's actually a very complicated question. So I'll throw it out there because, let's say we're growing strawberries in a location that was 100 miles from the market, as opposed to where we are right now, which is several thousand miles from some of the markets. So people go, okay, well, you're wasting that carbon footprint, all that gas you're using, and all this stuff, and that's truth to that. But the reality of some of it is, and we've done some work on this, the math isn't perfect, but sometimes you can grow an acre of strawberries, let's say in a certain area back east, and your season's fairly short. You use a lot of fertilizer, a lot of different inputs, and might get a quarter of the production we get from the same input here in California. So when you look at the total footprint, it's not as clear. It's not as easy, because when you look at the fertilizer and all the other inputs that went, you sometimes here in the Salinas Valley got 4 times as much production as you did from an open field production somewhere on the East Coast. So when you have this conversation, I think it's all about really understanding the complete picture. Now, when you get into some of the vertical farming, that creates another dynamic, and again, it's not easy and it's fluid, and it's nuanced. It's sometimes easy just to pick the carbon footprint because of the truck miles, but it sometimes can be a little bit more complicated than that. I don't know, Tom, you're the engineer, or Lori?
I just have one example. We used to bunch the broccoli, then we would shrink wrap it in plastic and put a sticker on it and ship. Walmart wanted it shipped this way. So these consumers started calling, going, I don't need my broccoli wrapped in plastic. What are you doing? No, this is such a waste, more packaging, et cetera. Well, what shrink wrapping it allowed us to do was force air cool it. We didn't have to ice the product, because iced product needs to be shipped in a wax-coated carton that's not recyclable, and it adds weight to the truck. So we were getting iceless, lighter weight. So the efficiency was in the supply chain. The consumer didn't see it. All they saw was more plastic. And once you explain that to them, they figured it out. But food waste is an emerging issue in America. Again, we're very fortunate that we live in the United States of America. Our food supply is very abundant. So again, technology is helping us again. The sales analysis, the forecasting is much more accurate, I think, today than it used to be, because we're able to analyze these purchase patterns. We're gearing up right now for what we call the Thanksgiving pull. Next week, our orders are going to skyrocket. Thank you, Thanksgiving. But we're able to more accurately forecast the demand because of technology.
Tom?
Yeah, I think Kevin brought up the carbon footprint analysis, and it's not just exactly the distance from where it's grown to where it's consumed, because when you do that urban indoor agriculture, there is energy requirement for the lighting and so forth. So and the solar panels perhaps that were put in place and so forth. So there are costs that have to be put in. It's a very complicated equation, but I think it's certainly an area, I see it as an area for expanding the agribusinesses in Salinas Valley. In fact, I'm curious, Kevin, if you're approaching or researching much in terms of either hydroponics or staying within soil and doing vertical farming of your products in urban areas.
No, we're absolutely doing that. We have, for example, in Holland, we have a glass house operation that on blackberries that's turned out to be spectacular because we can grow the berries very efficiently, and also we can pick them full ripe. Because, you know, if you get a berry when it's really sweet and it's picked full ripe, it makes all the difference in the world, right? Delightful. So, yeah, delightful. There we go. See, I'll get you guys into the cult here. But it's really about, you know, how can you, and in a way, how can you get that delightful berry to the consumer? Because if you've had a great blackberry, there's nothing like it. But there's nothing worse than having a clamshell where half the blackberries taste great and the other half taste terrible. That inconsistency drives people crazy, and that'll choke off demand. So there's a lot of this stuff comes back to how do you do it in such a way that creates the consumer, this is for the third time, so I apologize. The consumer pays for everything, and at the end of the day, they will drive everything. And if you don't understand that and don't focus on that, you'll lose. It's just that simple. You look at the great companies, whether it's fruits or vegetables or whatever, they always have an eye to the consumer, and they're always looking to find out what their consumer's about and where patents are going. Sometimes they're driving those patents by the way they're thinking innovatively. So all this stuff will actually be determined by the consumer, and how we do that will be the key.
Okay, Bob? Yeah, I would just point back at maybe a couple of related things. I mean, we've talked about the Internet of Things today, and certainly the ability to have visibility on data I think is going to help with waste. We see strong investments now between companies that develop seeds and weather satellites. And that's not by coincidence. That's so that coordination of the genotype, the genetics of the varieties that you plant, they can actually build predictive models now on how long it's going to take that to mature off of 10-year averages, 5-year averages, whatever it might be. If there's a change coming, they can predict, and so it's going to enable people to very much more focus in on what the harvest windows are going to be for these crops. And I think that'll help. That may have a help in reducing waste. I talked to somebody yesterday in Silicon Valley that's actually using the internet to identify areas where there might be abundances or oversupply of particular foods. And by making that visible to people within the food distribution system, they can access those kind of one-off types when there might be a 3 or 4 week window when you're high in something else. Maybe there are other distribution channels for that product that could be identified, where today we may not all have in our businesses, the visibility to see that. And then somebody's already mentioned, green waste and being able to convert that into fertilizers and other things. We're seeing more and more of that. I've seen restaurant scale versions of that now, but I can't imagine that more commercial size scales will be available soon. I think it's important to remember too that around the world, 40% of the fresh fruits and vegetables in Africa and Asia just go to waste for lack of basic refrigeration. So not necessarily high-tech all the time, but bringing current tech to certain parts of the world, the improved logistics that we enjoy that allow us to ship things around and know exactly what's going on, that doesn't exist everywhere. And so I think it's going to be, adaptation of technologies that are currently available in locations that really need it are going to help with the food shortage issues in the future.
Thanks, Bob. All right, we're going to hit our mark, so this will be the big finish, folks. And so I'm going to ask each of you if you have any final thoughts, with accompanied by one of the questions that came up was, in light of all these changes and new technology and investment, do you think consumers are going to be willing to pay more for the products of the future, knowing what's involved in delivering them, or does sustainability actually mean when all of these things come together, that's really not the thing to be concerned about? So just kind of a question about where does this head in terms of the consumer, and how do you feel the consumer? We're a small group of stakeholders today, and when we broaden the discussion to the consumers, what do you think their thoughts will be as the future comes their way? And then just if you have a final thought for everyone in the audience. Bob, I'll start with you.
Oh, man.
Okay. Tom, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll come from your right back to me.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Did you guys work that out?
And I was feeling sorry for Lori earlier, being the last one on the panel here today. Okay, so I get a chance to be first on this one. The business that I was involved in at Acopia Farms was one, our customer was the high-end restaurant. And so in this particular market segment, we had the advantage of being able to produce produce, leafy greens and herbs that were absolutely pristine and beautiful, so that we could compete not on a price point, but on the quality of the product, because it was grown indoors. Because every one of those, clamshells, a brine or whatever it was, were just absolutely beautiful. So they worked well for that market. We did have a little bit of a perception issue, and this was brought up earlier about products that are, quote, artificially grown or through artificial light. As a comparison, Greens in San Francisco was a good customer, but Chez Panay, Alice in Berkeley, not so much. So that was an example right there of the different, I've heard some tough customer comments here. So apparently we're in agreement up here. So there will be a perception, because more and more produce is going to be grown indoors. And I think that will need to change with time, because right now what happens is there's such a bad feeling about GMO and a lot of that backlash. But there has to be genetics that's going to go on with improving our yield and improving the products. And part of that will include growing produce indoors. So there will be a perception change that will take place. But one last comment I wanted to make to students is that I think that, somebody new to agriculture, to be in an area where there's going to be a tremendous growth, particularly in technology, this is an exciting place to be. And I think there's going to be a lot of dramatic change, a lot of job opportunity in this area.
Thanks, Tom. Lori?
I think if it tastes good, the consumer will buy it and pay for it. And if it's available, consistency, that will help. This is a very low margin business. The crops that I work in also have frozen alternatives available in the store that are sold at a cheaper price. So there's a breaking point. We know with our crops that we cultivate and where that breaking point is with the consumer. But it doesn't mean we're not going to continue to push the envelope and provide a better tasting and consistent eating experience. My friends in the tree fruit industry struggle with this. I work in the industry, and I seldom get a peach right. That ripeness and that bite, and Driscoll does such a great job on that focus on taste. So technology aside, if it doesn't taste good, no one's going to buy it and eat it. One of my favorite Darwinisms is it's not the strongest or smartest species that survives, it's the species that best adapts to change. 76 years, our business model today doesn't look anything like it did a decade ago, a decade before that. So adapting to change is key to surviving and thriving, and to Kevin's point, taking care of that next generation. And I think it's a very exciting time to be in agriculture. Technologies aside, these plant-based diets, there's so many trends moving in our favor that I'd encourage all of you to continue to pursue agriculture, ag tech-based careers, and I just want to thank CSUMB for putting such a focus on it. Our industry really appreciates it.
Thank you, Lori.
That's a hard act to follow. I completely. No, I think Lori, said it very well, which is, change is inevitable. It's like taxes and death, right? It's coming. So, how you adapt to change, it's everything. And if you look at the millennials, they're going to be the consumers of the future, and the numbers that speak for themselves, and they look at the world differently to, I'm a baby boomer. So, depending on where you come from and what you look at, you've got to be sure you understand where things are. If you're a company that focuses on putting great fruit out there at the right value, and you pay attention to what your consumers care about, I think the future's pretty bright. And I've been in ag my whole life. And I couldn't think of working in any other industry. I have no desire to go anywhere else. I wake up in the morning and I'm really excited to go to work. Sometimes I'm scared, but I'm always excited.
Bob?
Yeah.
Now it's your turn.
Now it's my turn. And, I think what was said is right. I think if you produce a product that tastes good all the time, consistency, people will pay more for it. I go back to when I was in biotech, and we had bred a new variety of tomatoes. And we did a heck of a job. Boy, it tasted good. It was bright red. It had that kind of backyard flavor. And we did a lot of consumer panel testing around the country in various markets. And we put various price tags on it. And there was virtually no price people wouldn't pay in order to get that on a consistent basis. I mean, it was just, it really was very heartening at the time to kind of see that response. The problem was is that we didn't have the technology at the time to do it consistently. We could do it sometimes, we couldn't do it all the time. And one thing you learn is that the consumer wants consistency. If they're going to pay that price, you can't disappoint them. You might get one chance, but you won't get two. And so, I think technology's advanced at that time, and you can see new varieties and new quality characteristics in just walking through your supermarket now. And so I think people will pay, but you've got to deliver on the promise that you make. I think as far as technology going forward, I think it's going to be important that we communicate what that technology is. We have an opportunity to frame the argument around technology from within our industry. And if we don't, others will. A classic example may be in the area of genetic engineering, where the argument has not been participated in by those developing the technology or those looking to use the tools. It's been developed from outside. And so you've got a one-way communication going, and it's made it very hard now to go back and kind of revisit that communication. So as we look at new technologies and begin to put them into our businesses, we have a lot of good message points that have all come out of what we've heard today, and even in the questions raised some of those. But it's going to be up to the industry to frame the discussion around the use of technology in food. One of the things that technology is going to give the consumer is greater transparency into how we produce our products. And therefore, we have an opportunity to communicate to them our stories, what we do. And we've seen a couple of stories from people who are in the industry today, and they're great stories about how the stewardship of the land, the products they make, the health benefits of the products that they put out there. We have to be more active in telling those stories and how we're using technology. And the transparency that consumers are going to have to the way we produce food is going to be an issue, a challenge for us going forward, but also a very strong opportunity. So I would just end there, and again, extend my thank you to CSUMB and the Grower Shipper Foundation for having this exciting event today.
Thanks, Bob. And while Mary Lou is coming back up to the podium, please join me in thanking what I think you'll all agree a pretty pair panel and an awfully good keynote speaker. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by most certainly thanking the panel, but I'm going to hold off a bit. I want to thank part of the panel for being so generous to us. We've got man packing. We got our veggie packs. So make sure you pick up your veggie packs here. You notice that's technology here, right, Lori? Right here. Okay, and then we've got berries in the back as well. Again, look at the gloss on those berries. They are fresh. So again, thank you to Driscoll's for providing us our berries today. And of course, we've got PG&E, who has been a sponsor for the last 6 years for this event, and we're just grateful that they continue to sponsor us on this event. Again, I'm going to call up our dean to help present some of the wine and I think the other gifts that we have, as well as Susan Marsalis. Susan is the executive, the executive director for the Growers Shippers Association Foundation. And I'd like them to get the goodies out, and we're going to present something to each of the panelists. But before we do that, the person who really held this together was my pal here, Dennis. Dennis, let's give him a real big hand. Thank you, Dennis. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So we'll have these little goodies out to everyone. Now, all of you students, we do still have some goodies in the background, at the back of the room, excuse me. But more importantly, how many of our exhibitors are still here? Because we have our exhibitors here, okay? So I'd ask that they can go back to the exhibiting hall that we've got in the back here. And I'd ask all students that we've got our exhibitors here till 2 o'clock. So I would like you all to take the time. Some of our students are coming a little later. But please take the time to go to the exhibiting booths, and they are in what we call the living room in the back. So when you get out the foyer, go to the right, and you'll find our exhibitors there. And they are in our expo area, okay? You'll see some wonderful technologies. You'll learn more about the ag business. So please take the time to do that. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. It's been a pleasure having you all here today. And again, let's give a round of applause to our wonderful panel today. Thank you very much.